Amazon spent $170 million building a phone that shoppers mostly ignored, reviewers mocked, and AT&T customers abandoned so quickly that the price crashed to 99 cents just 6 weeks later. A $649 phone became a bargain bin mistake almost overnight. And yet, buried inside that failure was the tech that would help create one of Amazon's most important products ever, Alexa. So the real question isn't just why the Fire Phone failed, it's why one of the most ruthless product companies in the world managed to build a phone that solved almost none of the problems people actually had, while accidentally inventing pieces of its future. The Fire Phone launched in 2014, and on paper, Amazon looked like it had a case. By then, Amazon was already one of the most powerful companies in the world. It had customers, it had scale, it had logistics, it had brand recognition, it had money. If any company could break into smartphones, maybe it was the company that had already broken retail. And that's exactly what made the Fire Phone so tempting. Amazon didn't just want to sell you a phone, it wanted to turn the phone into a moving extension of Amazon itself. A pocket-sized storefront, a hardware gateway to more shopping, more media, more time spent inside Amazon's ecosystem. That sounds plausible until you remember one crucial thing. People do not buy phones to be sold to. They buy phones to get through their day. They want texting, maps, photos, music, apps, and the comfort of knowing their expensive slab of glass can do basically everything. If you're going to charge $649 for a phone in 2014, you need to bring something extraordinary to the table. Amazon brought a lot of ambition. It did not bring enough usefulness, and the price alone was a problem. At $649 unlocked, the Fire Phone sat in the same neighborhood as the iPhone 6. For the average buyer, that wasn't a quirky Amazon experiment. That was a direct challenge to the best phone ecosystem on Earth. And if you don't beat Apple on design, app quality, camera quality, software, and status, then your $649 phone becomes a very expensive way to make a point. For people buying on contract, Amazon offered it at $199, which sounds more reasonable until you remember that smartphones are purchased in a world of monthly plans, carrier promotions, and brand loyalty. Even there, Amazon had to fight against established habits and established ecosystems. Then came the reality check. Just 6 weeks after launch, Amazon slashed the price to 99 cents on contract. That is the kind of move companies make when a product isn't just underperforming, it's when the company has already accepted that the original pricing strategy is dead and is now trying to salvage whatever demand remains. The result was ugly. Amazon took a $170 million write-down, and by the end it was sitting on $83 million worth of unsold phones collecting dust in warehouses. That's the kind of inventory problem that turns a product launch into a corporate embarrassment. Every unit sitting unsold isn't just a lost sale. It's cash trapped in boxes. Manufacturing costs already paid, marketing money already burned, logistics already committed. And in a company like Amazon, which usually obsesses over efficiency, the Fire Phone became a very expensive lesson in how quickly a hardware dream can become dead weight. But the reason it failed was not just the price. If this had merely been an overpriced phone, Amazon could have fixed it with a discount and moved on. The deeper problem was that the Fire Phone misunderstood what people want from a smartphone and misunderstood how hard it is to enter a market that already has winners. The first big mistake was the feature Amazon thought would make the phone feel futuristic, dynamic perspective. This was the phone's signature trick. It had 4 extra front-facing cameras whose job was to track your face and create a kind of 3D effect without glasses. As you moved the phone, the interface shifted slightly to give the illusion of depth. On a product demo stage, this sounds impressive. In real life, it mostly made people ask, "Why is my phone watching me?" The feature was creepy, unnecessary, and for many users, uncomfortable. Reviewers called it a gimmick. Some users even reported motion sickness just from looking at the lock screen. That's an incredible failure mode for a premium feature. Think about it. Apple spends years making a phone feel invisible, intuitive, and frictionless. Amazon added 4 cameras to make the phone stare back at you in the dark. The phone had to keep watching your face constantly, even at low light, using infrared lights. Technically, that's clever. Strategically, it was a distraction. Nobody was lining up to pay premium money for a device whose biggest party trick was making them mildly nauseous. And that points to the deeper issue with the Fire Phone. Amazon confused novelty with value. A good smartphone feature usually does one of 3 things. It saves time, it saves money, or it does something people care about enough to become emotionally attached to it. Dynamic perspective did none of those things. It was a solution to a question almost nobody asked. Then there was Firefly, the feature Amazon seemed to care about even more. Firefly got its own dedicated button. In theory, you could scan books, DVDs, products, food, even identify music playing nearby. In practice, it was basically a machine designed to turn real-world objects into Amazon transactions. See a book, buy the book. See a DVD, buy the DVD. Hear a song, get sold the song. The entire feature was an Amazon shopping funnel disguised as convenience. That's not automatically a bad idea. In fact, from Amazon's point of view, it was smart in the abstract. If you can make product discovery easier, you can make purchasing easier, and if purchasing gets easier, maybe customers buy more. But Firefly had a fatal flaw. It had to be useful before it could be profitable. If the system can't recognize simple items reliably, then the shortcut becomes slower than just typing the name into a search bar. And when that happens, the magic collapses into friction. That's what happened. Firefly often struggled to recognize basic objects. So instead of feeling like a futuristic bridge between the physical and digital worlds, it felt like a clumsy sales pitch with a camera attached. And that mattered because Amazon's whole advantage in retail is supposed to be convenience. If your convenience feature is slower than the old way, the customer won't feel assisted. They'll feel interrupted. This was the core contradiction of the Fire Phone. Amazon wanted the device to be a commerce machine, but the more it pushed commerce, the less it felt like a phone people wanted to carry. Because a phone is one of the most personal objects in daily life. It's your camera, your map, your message inbox, your entertainment screen, your alarm clock, your wallet, your work tool, and your emergency line to the outside world. If that device feels like a billboard for one company's shopping catalog, users notice. And not in a good way. But even if Firefly and dynamic perspective had been brilliant, the phone still had several structural problems that were far more serious. The biggest was software. Amazon built the Fire Phone on Fire OS, a forked version of Android. That sounds harmless until you realize what it really meant. No Google Play Store, no Google Maps, no YouTube app, and none of the mainstream Android ecosystem that makes a smartphone feel complete. This is where a lot of hardware companies make a classic mistake. They think a phone is mostly a piece of industrial design with some software on top. It isn't. A smartphone is an ecosystem product. The device itself matters, but the software ecosystem matters just as much because the value of a smartphone is not just in the phone. It's in the App Store, the developer support, the services, the familiarity, the compatibility, and the network effects built around it. Amazon tried to launch a $650 phone that sat outside the most important app ecosystem in the world. That is a very expensive way to be lonely. Imagine buying a premium car and finding out the gas stations only accept a different brand of fuel, the navigation system doesn't know where you're going, and the radio has been replaced by a speaker that mostly advertises one chain of stores. That's roughly the emotional experience Amazon handed to buyers. And then there was the carrier problem. The Fire Phone was exclusive to AT&T. That sounds like a launch strategy, but it was really a self-inflicted limitation. If you are trying to enter the smartphone market, you do not want to narrow your audience before you've even proven demand. Apple used to rely on carrier exclusives too, but by 2014, the market had moved. Consumers expected more flexibility, and competitors had made exclusivity less powerful than it once was. Amazon started by shrinking its addressable market. For a company that had spent years building a reputation on broad selection and massive scale, that was a strange move. But maybe the strangest part of all was who this phone seemed to be for. It wasn't really built like a normal customer product, it was built like a Bezos product. That sounds like a joke, but it captures something important about how the Fire Phone appears to have been made. Jeff Bezos was deeply involved, and by all accounts, he micromanaged a lot of the details, including the 3D screen idea, even when engineers reportedly didn't think it was necessary. And this is where good strategy can get derailed by founder psychology. Founders are often at their best when they're forcing a company to think bigger than it currently can. But founders can also become dangerous when their personal fascination becomes the product roadmap. A product team can recover from bad data. It is much harder to recover from a chief executive who is emotionally attached to a feature no one else wants. The Fire Phone looks like what happens when a powerful company mistakes executive enthusiasm for market demand. It had the price of a serious smartphone, the app ecosystem of an outsider, the carrier restrictions of an older era, and the gimmickry of a demo device trying to justify its existence. So the market responded exactly the way markets usually do when a product doesn't deliver enough value. It ignored it. And once the early sales numbers came in, the rest of the story moved quickly. Amazon dropped the price to 99 cents on contract in just 6 weeks. That is not a subtle correction. That is a fire sale in the most literal sense. When a product falls that fast, the original business logic has already collapsed. The company is no longer asking, how do we make this a hit? It's asking, how do we stop the losses from getting worse? Hardware is brutal that way. When software fails, you can patch it. When a website fails, you can redesign it. When a phone fails, you usually have warehouses full of expensive plastic and silicon reminding you that your assumptions were wrong. That's why the $170 million write-down mattered so much. It wasn't just an accounting entry, it was Amazon admitting that the units it had already built and shipped were worth far less than expected. And those $83 million worth of unsold phones in warehouses were the physical evidence of a strategy that missed the market. Still, the Fire Phone story would be easy to dismiss as just another corporate flop if it ended there. But it didn't, because inside the wreckage was technology Amazon actually needed. One of the most valuable pieces of the Fire Phone was not the screen, not the interface, and not the shopping gimmicks. It was the microphone array. The engineers working on the phone built impressive voice recognition hardware so the device could hear commands from a distance and respond more naturally. That kind of far-field voice capture is hard. Human voices are messy. Rooms are noisy. Echoes bounce around. If you want a device to hear you from across a room, you need serious hardware and smart signal processing. When the phone died, that work did not disappear. Amazon took that microphone technology and put it into a black cylinder, the first Echo. And suddenly, the failure made a lot more sense. Because the Fire Phone was not just a bad smartphone. It was a research and development project that accidentally fed a much better product category. A phone is a crowded battlefield. There are giants there, and consumers already know what they want. But a voice assistant sitting in your kitchen or living room. That was a much more open opportunity. The Echo did not need to compete with Apple on app quality or Google on mobile services. It just needed to answer questions, play music, control smart devices, and become useful in the background of daily life. That's a much smarter place for Amazon to attack. In a weird way, the Fire Phone was Amazon trying to enter a market where it didn't have an edge. The Echo was Amazon using the leftover pieces of that mistake to create a new market where its strengths mattered more. This is the part of the story that changes how you see the failure. Amazon did not simply lose on the Fire Phone and move on. It learned that voice control, far-field microphones, and ambient computing had real potential. Those ideas made much more sense when they were separated from the burden of being a smartphone. The phone was the wrong wrapper around a promising technology. Once Amazon stripped away the wrong wrapper, the idea became far more powerful. That's also why Bezos later framed failure differently. He said, "If you think that's a big failure, we're working on much bigger failures right now." That line sounds almost reckless at first, but it reveals Amazon's operating philosophy. Most companies treat a big failure as a sign to retreat. Amazon treated it as the cost of exploration. If you are trying to build entirely new categories, some expensive misses are part of the process. Of course, that philosophy has limits. A $170 million write-down is still a $170 million write-down. Inventory still has to be financed. Engineers still have to be paid. Time still gets lost. And not every learning experience is automatically justified just because a future product benefits from it. But the Fire Phone does show something important about Amazon as a business. The company was willing to let a hardware failure exist if the underlying technology could be reused in a more valuable way later. That is a very Amazon-style trade-off. A normal company might measure success only by the first product. Amazon often cares about the platform, the infrastructure, and the downstream utility of the work. If the first device fails but the engineering becomes useful in a future product, the money is not always completely wasted. That doesn't mean the Fire Phone was secretly a success. It wasn't. It was a failure, a costly one. It hurt Amazon financially. It confused customers. It failed to win over the app ecosystem. It underestimated how much trust consumers already had in iPhone and Android. It tried to make shopping feel like a feature instead of remembering that, for many people, shopping is exactly what they're trying to leave the phone to do. But it also taught Amazon a brutal lesson about where its real strengths were. Amazon was not going to beat Apple by making a better phone. It was going to win by making devices that used Amazon's strengths in commerce, cloud services, logistics, and voice technology. The Fire Phone tried to be a gateway into Amazon shopping. The Echo became something better, a new habit. And habits are where the real money lives. That's the hidden lesson underneath the entire disaster. The Fire Phone failed because it was built around the wrong incentive. It asked, how do we get people to buy more stuff from Amazon through a phone? But customers were asking, why should I replace a perfectly good smartphone ecosystem with a weird Amazon one? Those are not the same question. One is company-centered, the other is user-centered. And in consumer hardware, that difference is everything. Amazon learned that the hard way.